As we reported at the top of the broadcast, Donald Trump said he'd block all Muslim travel into the United States. The GOP presidential frontrunner is also blasting the strategy that President Obama laid out last night in a rare Oval Office address, a speech that was meant to reassure Americans in the wake of the San Bernardino mass shootings. President Obama spent much of the 14-minute primetime address outlining what the U.S. is doing and will continue to do to defeat ISIS.
First, our military will continue to hunt down terrorist plotters in any country where it is necessary. In Iraq and Syria, airstrikes are taking out ISIL leaders, heavy weapons, oil tankers, infrastructure. And since the attacks in Paris, our closest allies, including France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, have ramped up their contributions to our military campaign, which will help us accelerate our effort to destroy ISIL. Second, we will continue to provide training and equipment to tens of thousands of Iraqi and Syrian forces fighting ISIL on the ground, so that we take away their safe havens. In both countries, we're deploying special operations forces who can accelerate that offensive.
Well, President Obama did not announce any new strategies for fighting ISIS, and his critics say that's a big problem. The current game plan, they say, isn't working. ISIS is growing its ranks, stepping up its attacks. A lot to talk about with CNN military analyst and retired Army General Mark Hertling, also Chief International Correspondent Christian Amanpour. I remember we talked about this over the summer, and you quoted a counterterrorism official, Christian, who said, America's doing it half-assed and can't win half-assed. Do you think the president went far enough?
Look, there's a lot of debate. Essentially, a lot of people are saying that there's a lot of catch-up going on right now. But the fact of the matter is you can no longer talk about no ground troops because there are ground troops. I mean, he sent a special expeditionary force. There are special forces. They haven't all got there. But that whole debate is now being taken over by reality. You've got the majority of the American people for the first time in a CNN poll saying, send ground troops. You've got leaders in that region and in Muslim leaders in Paris, for instance, who I've spoken to saying, and counterterrorism officials and de-radicalization experts who say that the most important, the most powerful radicalization tool is this caliphate. The notion of a caliphate.
A successful caliphate.
Oof, whatever it is, it's out there. And you've got this cult of people going out there. I mean, these people are cultists. They're attracting cult-like devotion.
Right.
Yeah, it is like a cult. There was Est, it's a different cult. Then there's this. This is a death cult. It's the same kind of thing. And what they're saying, though, Muslim leaders around the world, many of them, including religious leaders, is that these people occupy territory in Syria and Iraq in which to propagate their so-called power. This territory has to be taken away from them. Has to be taken away from them. They cannot own territory to, as the French president said, create the biggest terrorist lab in the world right now. That involves ground forces.
General Hertling, I know you believe there are some aspects of the president's plan working. What do you think is working?
Well, first of all, I think we have to define this conflict for what it is. There are many Americans, many people in the Western world, who would like to see a war of annihilation. Let's do this right now, let's do it fast and have it done with. We've said from the very beginning, Anderson, that this is really, I'll put it in the category of a war of attrition. And I think that's what the president outlined in his original strategy. He reinforced it last night in his review of that strategy, although I'm sure there are some things behind the scenes going on in terms of a revision of elements of that strategy, the 7 lines of operation, that he put it in 4 categories, but there was actually 7 lines. For those of us who know it, we knew what he was explaining. But here's the thing. In Iraq and Syria, there are gains being made. They are not as fast as the Western world would like to see them, but you see across the board the lines of communications of ISIS are being affected. They are losing territory, not as much as we would like, as quickly as we like, but they are losing territory. There is a standing up of governments in Iraq, and truthfully, Mr. al-Abadi is coming under a great deal of pressure from the Shia because he is attempting to stand up more of a pluralistic government. You still have challenges in Syria, but even if you go in and destroy ISIS on the ground, and we're attempting to do that in a war of attrition with special operators that are geared towards specific targets as intelligence has grown, you have to see other aspects of this campaign. The financial effects, the messaging effects, the stopping of fighter flow, the coalition build, which is not as strong as it should be just yet. All of those are elements of a war of attrition when you take things away from the enemy you have to fight. You have to know the enemy, know the terrain, and know yourself, as Sun Tzu once said, in order to achieve victory.
But, Cristiano, one of the things that we've seen, certainly with San Bernardino and perhaps Paris as well, is that even if it is true that the territory that ISIS holds is shrinking, maybe in Syria or in Iraq, if they are encouraging people to stay in their home countries and just go and try to behead somebody on a subway, as we just saw in London over the weekend, or attack people in San Bernardino, that's a whole other way of fighting that requires a whole other way of counter-fighting.
Well, this was the huge big fear by law enforcement as the war in Syria became unmanageable and as it became worse and worse, and as Assad was enabling the rise of ISIS and other such groups who were amongst those fighting him. So you've got several issues here. Let's talk about the radicalization one. These people, if it's true what this woman did, pledged allegiance to the caliphate. Okay, this is what they're doing. The caliphate, according to anti-terrorism officials, is the big, major game changer. And then the other big game changer is online, that these people abroad are being radicalized, often self-radicalized. They haven't been sent by ISIS. We don't actually know that yet. There were a couple who, for whatever reason, did what they did, as ISIS keeps morphing its tactics. But law enforcement, counterintelligence, they say that for the first time in many iterations of this kind of extremist terrorism, that the ISIS folks are having such success online because people are, lapping this stuff up, and they're getting radicalized to the point of violence before law enforcement can step in, before they can and you talk about this, this knife attack. I think what's important is that more and more Muslims are coming out. There's, an observer who tried to face down this knife attacker in London. It was Twitter caught on camera. You ain't no Muslim, bruv. You're not a Muslim guy. Okay, so quit saying you are.
We're going to play that shortly coming up.
And in Paris, the same thing.
General Hertling, when you hear Donald Trump saying ban all Muslims from coming to the United States until we figure out, what the heck is going on, or whatever his verbiage actually was, as somebody who has fought overseas and for regimes that were, Muslim dominated, Afghanistan, Iraq, does it make the job harder for U.S. troops who are aligned with Muslim, soldiers in various countries around the world to do their job?
Anderson, what I would say is Mr. Trump's comments are the equivalent of Abu Ghraib on steroids. It is really something we don't need right now, as we're trying to gain the trust and confidence of the people who we hope will help us fight this scourge.
Explain what you mean by that, because some people here and there will say, okay, this is just political correctness. You're saying strategically this is not smart.
Strategically, it is a disaster. The things that Mr. Trump and others like him, when they're saying these sorts of things, is alienating a population. It would be the same, truthfully, or not quite as bad, as if we were to put a large number of ground forces in Syria right now. It would be seen as West invading Islam. It is exactly what all of our intelligence folks are telling us what ISIS wants. They want this kind of confrontation. They want to see indicators that the West is condemning all Muslims. It plays into their narrative. It's horrible. It is worse than what we saw when the news of Abu Ghraib came out in 2004.
General Hertling, I appreciate you being on. Christian Amanpour as well, always. Thank you. Up next.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.